The Washington Post obtained a trove of documents that really painted the reality of what's going on in Afghanistan, what's been going on since we launched the war in Afghanistan. And this is something that the Washington Post has been fighting to get documents on for 3 years. So finally they get the documents and they find out that our military, the Pentagon, they've been lying to us, shocker. But the extent to which they've been lying to us in an effort to keep this war going is particularly egregious. So let me give you the details on what they found. Since 2001, more than 775,000 US troops have deployed to Afghanistan, many repeatedly. Of those, 2,300 died there and 20,589 were wounded in action, and that's according to the Defense Department figures, okay? I'm giving you those numbers just to start off so you understand the price that we've paid when it comes to human lives for this war. Now, here are the other deaths. 3,800 US military contractors have died since we've launched the war in Afghanistan. 64,000 Afghan forces, and get a load of this, 43,000 Afghan civilians have died since we launched this war. 42,000 Taliban and other insurgents, these are estimated figures, have also died since we launched this war. Now, what's the cost in terms of the monetary cost? Well, since 2001, the Defense Department, State Department, and US Agency for International Development have spent or appropriated between $934 billion and $978 billion, and that's according to an inflation-adjusted estimate calculated by Nita Crawford, a political science professor and co-director of the Costs of War Project at Brown University. Now, the United States has allocated more than $133 billion to build up Afghanistan, more than it spent, adjusted for inflation, to revive the whole of West Europe with the Marshall Plan after World War II.
So more context, $133 billion would cover free college for all kids in this country that would normally go to a public college under, for example, Bernie Sanders' plan for at least 2 years, okay? So instead of doing that and providing equality of opportunity for our kids at home, we've spent that money in Afghanistan rebuilding it. How's that going?
No, it's a disaster.
And we, as they point out, we rebuilt almost all of Western Europe with far less money, and it's not an accident. A lot of people got really, really rich off of rebuilding Afghanistan. So you see it as a waste because you're just a taxpayer and that's your money that's being thrown into the garbage, right? But a lot of people that are in power think, no, it's not the bug, it's the feature. That's how we get paid doing this nonsense. And then, look, I don't know how people are gonna feel about this, but nearly 3,000 Americans died on 9/11, and then we started these two wars. Afghanistan, I think, had at least some degree of logic to it because that was where Al Qaeda was based at the time. Iraq had no logic to it at all. Iraq didn't attack us, hated Al Qaeda. We attacked them because of the oil and used 9/11 as an excuse, and it was just horrific in every way. But even in Afghanistan, so we find now that 43,000 civilians have died. We lost nearly 3,000 people. We don't blink when it's 43,000 Afghan civilians. And my point isn't that we shouldn't have gone into Afghanistan. My point isn't that we shouldn't have done anything about 9/11. I think that we certainly should have. We should have been more thoughtful about it, and we should have had a more holistic approach into it. And some of it obviously could have involved force. But spending 18 years there and killing 40, or being part of a war that killed 43,000 civilians, is not what I would call productive, and it has deep moral problems. Just because it didn't happen to our neighbors doesn't mean it didn't happen. There are also real people. In Iraq, far more civilians died, according to some estimates, nearly 1 million. So that is just an atrocity beyond measure. But Afghanistan is also an atrocity. When they lose 43,000 innocent civilians, that's also something your heart should break over.
Now, I gave you how much we've spent in taxpayer money on the war in Afghanistan, a little over $1 trillion. But keep in mind that that estimate does not include wounded veterans, how much it costs to treat them, to take care of them once they're back in the United States and they're dealing with mental health conditions like PTSD. That is an added cost that has not been included in these figures. And one other thing that you should be aware of is that when it comes to any type of government program that actually helps the American people, they want to know, how are you going to pay for it? They want to account it. They want to make sure they audit everything and everything's right. But in this case, the government has not done a comprehensive accounting, because why would they? It's a giant racket, and the campaign donors that we rail against on the show on a regular basis are getting rich off of this type of war, right? So let me give you what's going on in terms of like people who have been part of the military, people who have been close to this war, and what they've been saying behind the scenes. So there's General Douglas Lute, White House Afghan war czar. He says, we were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing. What were we trying to do here? We didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking. If the American people knew the magnitude of this dysfunction, 2,400 lives lost, who will say this was in vain? So again, this is behind the scenes. This is what they really felt about the chaos and the confusion when it came to this war.
Meanwhile, when Obama was in office and even when Trump is in office, they're like, the Pentagon says, we cannot leave Afghanistan. We're in the middle of a really important mission which we are about to complete, and we are going to get victory. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they're like, we don't even know what victory means. We don't know what the hell we're doing here, but grab as much money as you can. Just grab it and then we'll spend it over there, and then later we'll all retire and become really, really rich defense contractors.
Yeah, and
let's keep it real on that too.
And remember, publicly they say one thing, and then privately they admit that things aren't really working out well. It's complete and utter chaos. In fact, former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld would write these internal memos, and through this great investigative reporting by the Washington Post, we have a sense of what he wrote in those memos. So let's go to one of them from April 17th, 2002. Rumsfeld wrote, quote, I may be impatient. In fact, I know I'm a bit impatient. We are never going to get the US military out of Afghanistan unless we take care to see that there is something going on that will provide the stability that will be necessary for us to leave. Help. That's one of the memos. One other memo from September 8th, 2003 reads as follows. I have no visibility into who the bad guys are. We are woefully deficient in human intelligence.
Well, look, let me give you context on Rumsfeld too. So now you see behind the scenes, he admits to being clueless. But a couple of things that he did that contributed to us being clueless. One, going into Iraq, he fired everyone who spoke Arabic because he called them Arabist apologists.
Smart, that sounds real smart.
So then we went into Iraq and no one spoke Arabic. And so we didn't know how to communicate to the locals. So we were having trouble getting allies, figuring out intelligence, figuring out what was going on. Because Don Rumsfeld is an avowed dumbass. Like he cherishes ignorance. He values ignorance. Then he writes memos behind the scenes. Oh my God, what the hell's going on? Help. Well, that's what happens when you fire smart people who were supposed to help us communicate, right?
Right, well, I mean, at least he was right in his self-assessment. He's the one who wrote, we are woefully deficient in human intelligence.
Exactly, starting with you.
Yeah.
And then also, if you don't know, it's an amazing story New York Times broke in 2005. Don Rumsfeld got a note from one of the top generals that we had in Afghanistan at the time, back in, I think, 02, and said, we got him. We've bin Laden, we have him cornered in Tora Bora. Permission to proceed. And Rumsfeld wrote him back saying, no, you do not have permission. Do not proceed against bin Laden. Wow. And so now he says, I don't know, how the hell do we get out of Afghanistan? Or he says at the time, well, the reason you didn't want to pursue bin Laden, and I'd love for him to answer. If we're wrong, I'd love to have Don Rumsfeld come on TYT or any other show and and answer the question, why did you refuse to have an American general go get bin Laden when he said he had him cornered? New York Times broke that story. And so the real reason is because he needed an excuse to start the Iraq war. If you remember this, another story that broke about Rumsfeld, he said the problem with Afghanistan is it's not a target-rich environment, and Iraq is. In other words, there's more stuff to bomb in Iraq. So we had to stay in Afghanistan long enough to start the Iraq war. Then he starts the Iraq war, which is his real objective, blow more stuff up, grab all the oil, and give it to American companies, some of whom the vice president used to work for, among others. And then he turns around and goes, what the hell are we still doing in Afghanistan? Now that we're in Iraq.
Yeah. So I'll tell you why they were and continue to be in Afghanistan, because it's a racket, right? There's a ton of money flowing in, that's taxpayer money. Contractors are getting rich. In fact, the military is encouraged to waste money, according to these internal documents that the Washington Post was able to obtain. So let's talk a little bit about that encouragement, okay? So again, the Post reports one unidentified contractor told government interviewers he was expected to dole out $3 million daily for projects in a single Afghan district roughly the size of a US county. He once asked a visiting congressman whether the lawmaker could responsibly spend that kind of money back home. He said, hell no. Well, sir, that's what you just obligated us to spend, and I'm doing it for communities that live in mud huts with no windows. So look, keep in mind, it's this like cycle where if you don't immediately waste that money, the contractors won't get more, right? They won't get more taxpayer money, the war won't continue, and people won't continue getting rich off of this nonsense.
And did those, what they describe as mud huts, turn into skyscrapers with all that money pouring in?
No, of course.
No, of course not. Because oftentimes they get a certain percentage of the money spent. So they have an incentive to spend more of your money. It doesn't matter if they just throw it in the trash. It doesn't matter if they build more mud huts or they build nothing at all. Because the whole point is to take their percentage off the top, and then they could burn the money. It doesn't matter to them because it's your money, not theirs.
Exactly. So who's gonna pay for our healthcare? Who's gonna pay for free public college? All right, like there's never any question about the disgusting waste that happens in these wars abroad. But when it comes to using our taxpayer money to actually benefit us and create a better situation here domestically, that's when they ask all the tough questions, both Democrats and Republicans. So let's go to some more internal memos. This time, a 2015 memo written by, of all people, General Michael Flynn. So this is about the cycle of lies and failure. According to Michael Flynn, he wrote, so they all went in for whatever their rotation was, 9 months or 6 months, and were given that mission, accepted that mission, and executed that mission. Then they all said, when they left, they accomplished that mission. Every single commander, not one commander is going to leave Afghanistan and say, you know what, we didn't accomplish our mission. So the next guy that shows up finds it, their area screwed up, and then they come back and go, man, this is really bad. So again, remember, publicly they're saying like, oh yeah, we executed that mission, everything's great, and then the new rotation comes in and they're like, what do you mean? This is disastrous, this is chaos.
Yeah, so this is a great story by the Washington Post. So I love to give them credit when they do a wonderful job like this. But I hope that they institutionally, they remember this the next time the Pentagon tells them something. Because the Washington Post, New York Times, almost all the media organizations, when the Pentagon comes out with a press release, they dutifully report it as if it's completely true. And right, honestly, it's almost never completely true. And we have now done dozens, maybe hundreds of stories where the Pentagon says something a couple of years later, and sometimes it's just a couple of weeks later, the Pentagon will be like, oh yeah, we were kidding about how bin Laden hid under his wife. That was just total nonsense lie that we made up. But anyway, you guys all printed it, so it's already too late. Put the correction in page 827 where nobody sees it, and New York Times puts it on page 827 and we're done with it, right? So it's a trick that they use over and over and over again, and yet the media falls for it 98% of the time. Oh, the Pentagon said it, so it must be true. And in fact, if activists question the Pentagon, they're looked at very skeptically, like, you guys are outsiders with no vested financial interest. So that would make you more likely to be honest, right? You're like, we look at you skeptically. The Pentagon that has incredible vested interest and has been proven to lie throughout its entire history all the time. Of course it's true. We assume that it's 100% true. Only after an exhaustive investigation, decades later, will we tell you, oh, it was all lies.
And by the way, all of this injustice continues today. In fact, Donald Trump, for all of his anti-war rhetoric, has really amplified or has become more aggressive when it comes to his actions in Afghanistan. In fact, more civilians have died under his watch. So let me give you that statistic, which blew my mind. Last year, under his watch, 3,804 Afghan civilians were killed in the war, and that's according to the United Nations. That is the most in 1 year since the UN began tracking casualties a decade ago.
Well, part of the reason for that is he told them to more aggressively bomb without concern for civilians. And to be fair to him, he said it in the campaign. He said, I want to kill their family members. I don't want to just kill what he calls terrorists. God knows if they even have the right guy. Oftentimes they don't. But he's like, I also want to murder their family members. He said it on the campaign trail. So here he is delivering on it, murdering civilians more than anyone else has in Afghanistan, because he just doesn't care about human life if it's not his. And so look, if the mainstream media was accurate in how they reported whatever the Pentagon says at the time, contemporaneous, they would always say the Pentagon says they did this, but has a deep track record of not telling the truth, right? But they never ever put that caveat in.
And it's not just the Washington Post.
No, definitely not.
Establishment media refuses. I mean, it's a huge debate today within newsrooms about whether or not it's okay to call out lies, to call lies what they are. And they're still sticking to this like old school antiquated model of refusing to call a liar. And I think that that's a huge disservice to Americans.
Yeah, by the way, it's not super old school. Old school journalism was watchdog journalism, and you would definitely call it a lie. This is over the last 40 years or so, more corporate journalism, which it doesn't want to rock the boat. It's to protect the status quo. Yeah. And that's why, hey, it disrupts things if you call people in charge liars. And so then people might get agitated and want to change things. So everybody be cool, let's just water it down. Now, having said all that, again, I don't want to lose track of the story today. Washington Post with brilliant reporting on this, which we deeply appreciate. Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.